Well, let's see if we can learn some of the tricks of the trade from Piers Morgan, who's the host of Tonight for CNN, and Katie Couric, who's a presenter on ABC News in the USA. Welcome to both of you. What's the mark of a good interview, do you think? Katie?
I think probably ultimately it's being a good listener. I'm dismayed and frankly shocked at sometimes watching interviews on television and watching the subject kind of breeze through. I think it's important to listen and then ask really cogent follow-ups, and I think that's probably the most important aspect of a good interview.
I couldn't agree with you more. It absolutely infuriates me listening to someone reciting a list of questions they previously prepared, and they clearly haven't listened to the answers. What do you think, Piers Morgan?
Well, I think that I probably come from the same school as you, Jeremy, where I think that the power of interruption, particularly with politicians, is massively underrated. And I think you see many interviews, particularly in America, I find with politicians where you're watching and you're screaming at the interviewer to get stuck in. And there's a reticence to do that. There is a higher level of civility, I think, in the exchanges there. Although I have to eliminate Katie from that, because Katie's great quality, I felt, when I watched her do political interviews, is being able to ask very simple, direct questions, as she did with, say, Sarah Palin, which often elicit fantastically uncomfortable answers. For instance, what media do you read? A very simple question, but one that left her completely flummoxed. So I think, simplicity, yes, listen to them, but don't listen to them for too long.
Katie, I know you don't want to talk about how you kiboshed Sarah Palin's political career.
I'm happy to discuss that. I'm happy to discuss that interview.
Take the credit if it's going. Were you surprised?
Surprised. I think when I interviewed Governor Palin, she was still sort of a blank canvas. There wasn't a great deal known about her. She had done just a few interviews, one with Charlie Gibson at ABC, one with Sean Hannity at Fox, and I was sort of the third person to spend time with her. And, I honestly didn't know what to expect. I think that my goal in that interview was really to understand her policy positions, the way she thought, what made her tick, her political ideology. And so I worked very hard at asking questions, a series of questions, first at the United Nations and later after a campaign event in Ohio, to just basically really find out those things. And so my questions were quite open-ended, and I think in that case I didn't interrupt. I just let her speak.
Absolutely. She sank herself.
Well, I think she probably feels as if she did not perform well in that interview. But, I think that not interrupting her and letting her try to kind of convey her sentiments was really the smart thing to do. And I actually talked to some people before I did that interview, Democrats and Republicans. And they said, very little is known about Governor Palin, just let her talk. And I think that's one mistake that interviewers sometimes make. They want to fill the blank, the empty space of a conversation. And if you just don't talk, you let the subject fill an empty space. And I know when I'm interviewed, I'm careful, to not have that urge and impulse and to kind of control that.
I'm very tempted to stay silent here, but I won't. Because you touched on something very important, haven't you, which is the question of research. You have to do your homework, don't you?
Definitely.
Piers.
Go ahead, Piers, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think that my brother comes from the British Army, he's an Army colonel, and they have an unofficial motto of the 7 Ps, which is prior planning and preparation prevent piss-poor performance. And I think that a lot of interviewers could take that 7 Ps motto and apply it to interviewing, because you've got to know where your subject is going to potentially divert to when you're interrogating them. And if they suddenly want to go off into some other area because it suits them, if you can go with them, then you're going to be one step ahead of them. I also think that the power of silence is very interesting. I spoke to David Frost about this. I said, what would be the one bit of advice you give me when I come to do an American show? And he said, honestly, when I interviewed Nixon, the key thing was to just never underestimate the power of silence. Let the subject fill the void, fill the gap. And that is so true, but particularly on television.
What about it when you get a guest whom your producer has done a deal with, that you won't talk about something in particular? I mean, I gather, Piers, you don't want to talk about phone hacking.
I didn't say that.
Oh, you're quite happy to talk about it, are you?
You could talk about whatever you like, Jim. I've never made any precondition to any interview in my life.
But do you not find it it's an issue, isn't it?
For who?
Well, for someone like you who doesn't want to talk about phone hacking, or for anyone who doesn't want to talk about...
But hang on. I'm not letting you get away with that. That's just cheeky interviewing. I didn't make any precondition for this interview. I'm very happy to talk about anything. So you have to be accurate with your allegations about your interviewee, Jeremy. It's very naughty of you. If you want to talk about phone hacking, I'm very happy to. What I would say generally, in particular, I found in America compared to Britain, that many people do try and put preconditions on interviews, and I think it's a very, very dangerous, slippery path to go down if you allow them to do that. And I think you have to, if there's a particular personal reason, and it's not really relevant to the interview's significance in terms of news, then I think you can listen to it. But anything to do with policy, if you're a politician, forget it.
Well, you better have a word with your press officer then. Katie Couric, what do you think about this question of areas that people ask not to talk about?
I think this is when you should practice the power of silence, Jeremy. I don't think I've ever accepted preconditions or something is not allowed to be asked. I think, as Piers said, I think if it's a personal thing that really has no bearing on the true content of the interview, that's something that should be sort of decided on an individual basis. But, I think preconditions are just unacceptable usually in an interview setting.
Here's a question that I personally don't like being asked because there's such a multiplicity of answers to it. Who's your dream interviewee?
I hate that too. It's sort of like saying, what is the best meal you've ever eaten? And that's sort of presupposing you've only had one good meal in your life. So are you talking about the best interview we've ever done, or our dream interview?
Look, you're far too modest, I know, to talk about the best interview you've ever done. Certainly Piers is. He's a very shrinking violet.
Very humble, yeah. Very humble.
Yes, it's the word that comes to mind when I think of you, Piers. No, I'm thinking of... No, is there the dream interview? One always resorts to, I'd like to talk to the Pope or something.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, the few people that I really would have liked to have interviewed are no longer with us. I would have loved to have interviewed Jacqueline Onassis. I would have loved to have interviewed Princess Diana, because I think they were so sort of
Piers, you've got one name before you get gonged out.
Jack Nicholson. He hasn't done a TV interview in, I think, about 35 years. He would be sensational. Him...
Okay, thank you.